Good morning, teacher.
Good morning, everybody. So today we are going to discuss about the cognitive process, right? The topic of our discussion last week was Chaitasika. I hope that you had a general understanding of this topic, Chaitasika. We have discussed that basically this Chitta and Chaitasika, you need to really put them together to have a clearer understanding of the mental process, right? So now we are not going to go through the books page by page, because it is taking a longer period of time. So what I'm doing basically is that after going through this text, I'm trying to make some notes and make a presentation of the important points so that you can have a general understanding of the topic. And then when you look at the text, the respective chapters on different topic, then you'd have a better understanding, a fuller understanding. Okay, so that is the idea. Okay, so before we directly go into the discussion of today's topic, that is cognitive process, do you have anything to share with regard to the previous topic of discussion? You are supposed to write a summary on this Chaitasika as well, right? Yeah. So I have received some summaries of some of you, but most of you have not submitted yet. Probably you have been very busy with the study of so many different subjects. And you would have to write essays for each different subject, right? I see.
Yes, teacher.
So anyway, because we are having these discussions, I'm guessing that actually it should not be very difficult when you look at these chapters on these topics, different topics on Chitta, Chaitasika, and so on. You can just pick one specific section, that you feel easier to understand, or probably you are interested in that section. Then you can just focus on that, and then probably you can write a summary. For your own understanding, of course, it is better if you go through the entire chapter. So far, actually, especially on the first topic of discussion, that is Chitta, out of the 4 ultimate realities, I have received only one summary that was focused entirely on the whole chapter. Otherwise, everybody is just providing me summaries of a small section, but that is also okay. So it depends on your interest, and as I said, always, I mean, of course, there are so many books on Theravada Abhidhamma, so many articles you can find, but I have chosen these 2 texts. One is a representative of kind of classical text, right? And the Abhidhamata Sangaha, that represents a summary presentation of the 7 Abhidhamma text. That is, in fact, considered as a kind of introductory text. So, even in the traditional Buddhist studies setting, normally this is one of the most important texts that is suggested to go through so that one becomes familiar with the important topics of discussion in Abhidhamma, right? So that is why we have chosen that text. And if you really go through the text, you would find that everything is presented very beautifully, nicely, intelligibly. So there should not be so much of problem in understanding the discussion within the text. And if you are finding it difficult to understand, from this text, then I have suggested this other text, which is a modern scholastic text, Theravada Abhidhamma, by Professor Y. Karunadasa. So a lot of things that you find difficult to understand from Abhidhammata Sangaha can become clear if you look at the corresponding sections in this text. Okay. Similarly, when you are going through Professor Karunadasa's text, if you find it difficult to understand a certain section, then you can always look at the Abhidhammata Sangha, right? So today, the discussion on the cognitive process, I have particularly focused on Professor Karunadasa's text because, when I looked at this text Abhidhammata Sangaha, I found that the discussion is quite elaborate. So if you just go through each different section, it will take longer time, and also sometimes one may be a bit confused because there is a lot of similar kind of discussions, every now and then, right? Because it is elaborate. Whereas in this text by Professor Karunadasa, he, if you look at his text, you would find that most of the things that are considered as a kind of elaborate explanations are really cut off. They just focused on the important topic of discussion, that is just the cognitive process, okay, in its active phase and also passive phase, right? So I'm guessing that you have some understanding of what it means by cognitive process, right? Again, it is a functioning of Chitta and Chaitasika, right? Yeah. But here, what we are going to discuss is how each different cognitive moment takes place, right? Because so far we have been discussing, how many Chittas and what is their nature in terms of wholesomeness and unwholesomeness, or in terms of Kiriya Chitta or Vipaka Chitta, and also in terms of different realms of existence, Kama Vachara Chitta, Rupa Vachara Chitta, Arupa Vachara Chitta, and Lokottara Chitta, right? Similarly, when discussing about Chaitasika, we come to know that you cannot really differentiate between Chitta and Chaitasika. You cannot really divide concretely. You can have just a kind of a mental analysis, right? Because what do you mean by Chitta is actually something that arises or that is accompanied by a number of Chaitasika. Without the Chaitasika, there is no Chitta, right? And then without the discussion of Chitta, you cannot separately talk about Chaitasika. So what it means is that together they form the cognitive process, and also each cognitive moment or cognitive event. When you talk about one cognitive moment, and today we are going to discuss that you are not going to have complete cognitive moment every time. There are some cases where the entire process is not completed for different reasons. Now, how do you generate any particular type of consciousness? You need to have basis, that is indriyas, and then you need to have object, sense organs and sense object, right? So it says chakuncha paticca rupecha uppajjati chakku vijnana tinnang sangati phassa. Based on indriyas, sense faculty, and sense object, there is sense consciousness. If, for example, I sees a form, then the kind of consciousness that is arisen is called I consciousness. When these three things come together, it is called phassa. Now this is from Sutta, right? Tinnang sangati phassa. And then immediately after contact, there is feeling. And after feeling, there is thought process, perception, right? And then that is how you form ideations, ideas. So once these ideas are formed, it says that the individual then falls into the trap of the process, right? So it continues. So that is from the Sutta, but what is explained in the Abhidhamma is that it is not that simple. It is not just when sense indriyas come in contact with sense object, there is a particular sense consciousness. It is not that simple, and it is explained in terms of 17 mind moments. So you can say actually sub moments. So all these 17 sub moments comprise a full cognitive moment, right? So you need to keep in mind of these doors, sense doors: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and then the objects. So on the part of your sense doors, they should function properly. And a particular type of consciousness associated with each sense door should accompany by a certain number of cetasikas. We will come to that discussion later on. For example, why we need to discuss this is that one of the questions that was raised is that, does I sees form, or is it the I consciousness that sees or that cognizes the object, right?
Sorry, teacher.
Then the question that is raised is that without the support of consciousness, I cannot see. And without the I, how can consciousness cognize a form, right? Now this is on the part of sense doors, but on the part of object, there is also a certain discussion and especially on the part of intensity of the object. If the object is strong enough, it is it will contribute to form a full cognitive event or cognitive moment. If it is not strong, if it is light or very light, then it does not produce a full cognitive moment. Right? So you are supposed to go through at least a few pages from this chapter, and I hope that you have done so that our discussion today will become, I think, fruitful. It seems that Buntan wants to say something. Did you raise your hand?
Yes, teacher, because I didn't see your slide. I thought teacher not here yet.
No, I did not share my slides yet. Any question or remark so far?
So teacher, today again we will have to go to hospital again today.
I see. So
At 9 o'clock. So before 9 o'clock we are supposed to be ready.
I see. It's okay.
Yeah, just for information.
Yeah. For the test again?
Yesterday
Okay,
send
so
the email to go and test again. I don't know why I have to test again and again.
Okay.
In Abhidhamma, the main idea just on, if we see in the chart, have only 3 parts that they mention, like the karmical variable 13 and unwholesome 14 and beautiful 25. Look like in the Abhidhamma they just divide. These are the main important point here. Did you
Those
got
are
my...
numbers of Chatasika, right? There are basically 4 categories. First is common to all, Sabba Chatasika Sadharana. Second group is called Pakinaka. And then you have the group of unwholesome Chatasikas and then beautiful Chatasikas. So the basic characteristics of these 4 classification is that while the first group of Chatasikas, 7 I think in number, these 7 Chatasikas are present in all 89 Chittas, right? The second group of Chatasikas, Pakinakas, they are not present in all types of Chittas, but they are present in most of them. And one specific characteristics of these 2 categories of Chatasikas is that they are not, morally really distinguishable, in the sense that if they arise together with unwholesome Chatasikas, unwholesome Chittas, then they take the form of unwholesomeness. When they arise together with wholesome Chitta and Chatasikas, they take the form of wholesomeness. And in the case of the Chatasika belonging to unwholesome category, they always arise in the unwholesome Chittas. And the beautiful Chittas always arise in the beautiful Chatasikas always arise in the beautiful Chittas.
Thank you, teacher.
Yes, so let us now look at this. So this is the topic of our discussion today. Let us go through this slowly. Yes. Bhavanga Chitta and cognitive process. So here I have provided you a picture. And from this picture, you can have some understanding. So when you talk about cognitive process, it is represented in this way, that the stream of consciousness, that is Vijnana Sota, stream of consciousness, that is consisted of a number of cognitive moments, mind moments, even though it is presented in this way with so many dots, there is a very close link between every two dots, right? And it is done by this Bhavanga Chitta, passive form of consciousness. So there is always a continuity, but within the continuity, there is nothing, permanent that is present or that transmits or that functions as a basis. So continuity is there in terms of causality, cause and effect, but without any underlying substance or entity. That is the understanding. Now you would find that there are three phrases used. One is rebirth consciousness, Padisandhi Chitta, Bhavanga, life continuum, Chuti Chitta, death consciousness. Okay, so two things to keep in mind here. One is that when somebody is having a life in a particular lifetime, there is a incessant, continuous cognitive process or Vijnana Sota, stream of consciousness that goes on, right? Since one's birth until one's death. So this comes under one discussion. And then next, the question is, how does rebirth take place? Is there any breaking of consciousness and so on? How is the continuity maintained? So that is also explained in terms of Bhavanga Chitta and Chuti Chitta and Padisandhi Chitta. Okay. So when this continuation is maintained, then the question is, what functions as a cause and what functions as an effect? What is the causal connection, right? So we'll come to that also. And what it shows here, mind process, mind process, mind process, and then Bhavanga, life continuum, Bhavanga, Bhavanga. So this suggests that every, between every two cognitive moment, there is underlying this passive consciousness, that is Bhavanga. But one should not understand that there are two parallel processes. One is active consciousness, the other is passive consciousness. No, there is just one consciousness. It is just its different phases. Okay, so it is like, two sides of the same coin. When it is active and when it is passive. Now look at this slide here. This I've taken from the Abhidhamma Sangaha. So I try to put all of the important points together so that you can quickly look at it and probably have some understanding. And it is better if you can remember some of this. Now, yeah, let's go through this. When you talk about thought process, it says in the compendium of thought process, 6 kinds of 6 classes, each should be understood, namely 6 bases, 6 doors, 6 objects, 6-fold consciousness, 6 processes, and 6-fold presentation of objects. Now, as I said, in the Abhidhamma Sangha, things are presented in this way, in more elaborate way. So sometimes it may appear to be a bit confusing because of so many numbers, right? But we'll just focus on the main topic of discussion, that is, how the cognitive process takes place. So basically, if you look at this, you find the 6 bases refers to the 6, sense organ, and 6 doors, basically the faculty, the door, eye door. So eye door has, for example, external aspect and internal aspect as well. 6 objects referring to 6 corresponding objects. 6-fold consciousness. 6-fold consciousness refers to the consciousness associated with 6 doors, right? And therefore you have 6 processes. So it doesn't mean that all these 6 processes taking place together. What it means is that if it is associated with eye, it should be considered as a different process, right? And if it is associated with ear, it is a different process. It is connected to this 6 sense organs and their objects. 6-fold presentation of objects. So that is how we say 6 sixes. Okay. The presentation of objects to the process-freed consciousness is 3-fold: karma sign, destiny sign. Now, this comes under the discussion of Chuti Chitta and Patisandhi Chitta. Okay, so process-freed consciousness. One is called process consciousness, that is when the consciousness is active. In other words, active consciousness. Process-freed consciousness is Bhavanga Chitta, when it is passive, when there is no process going on. So it says that, for example, at the time of death, last thought moment, Chuti Chitta, can have any of these 3 signs, either a past karma appearing in the mind moment, or karma sign, a sign related to a particular karma, or destiny, the destination where one is going to be reborn. And same object is maintained in the bhavanga and then Patisandhi Chitta, and then the next life continues. 6-fold presentation of objects should be understood as follows. Now, so the 6 doors, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, are divided into 2 categories: 5 sense doors and mind door. Panchadwara Avajjana, Manodwara Avajjana. Right? Because these 5 senses they have physical basis, whereas Manodwara Avajjana, mind door, does not have physical basis. Manodwara can be associated with the 5 senses in the sense that when you see something with your eyes, when a full cognitive moment take place, after the contact between the sense organ and sense object, there is a mental process that goes on halfway, right? So therefore, mind is associated with all these 5 senses, but mind can have its own, cognitive process alone. So in the case of 5 sense doors, 4, different types of object you can have: very great, slight, and very slight. So they are discussed in relation to what form of object can contribute to what type of cognitive process. If the object is very great, that means if it has great impact on your sense faculty, then the cognitive process will be complete to form a full cognitive moment. Whereas if it is just great, slight, and very slight, accordingly, you are not going to have complete 17 moments to form a cognitive event. sometimes probably 10 or 8 or 4. So it is not going to be a complete cognitive moment. In the same way, in the case of mind door, there are two types of object. One is clear, one is obscure, not clear. Okay. Yeah, it's okay. We will continue the discussion. Later on, you can join again.
Okay, teacher. Bye-bye.
Yeah. The bases, doors, and objects therein are, as described before, the sixfold types of consciousness are eye consciousness, nose consciousness, ear consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. And then the 6 doors, process connected with the eye door, ear door, nose door, tongue door, body door, and mind door. The 6 types of consciousness, process connected with the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. Yeah. So this cognitive process, as I have been saying, you can understand in terms of Viti Chitta and Viti Mutta. So Viti Chitta refers to process consciousness when it is active, and Viti Mutta refers to process free consciousness when it is passive. And when you talk about any cognitive moment, you have to keep in mind the combinations of Chitta and Chaitasika. Any specific cognitive moment, right? And this we have very quickly mentioned. Bhavanga Chitta, Chuti Chitta, and Padisandhi Chitta. The discussion of these 3 types of Chitta comes only when you talk about 2 lifetimes. Okay, how the rebirth takes place and what is it that connects between the 2 lives. And again, of course, in the thought process, it can be kusala thought process, it can be akusala, it can be vipaka, it can be kirya. This is this we have already discussed, in the discussion of chitta. So, and this thought process can be connected to kamavachara, rupavachara, arupavachara, and lokutara. Okay, now let's come into the main discussion. So let us look at this slide. So it says that the Abhidhamma theory of cognition is based on 2 basic ideas of early Buddhist psychology, 2 important ideas. One is that mind is a process without an enduring substance, right? So what do you call mind is a process and without any enduring substance? There is nothing that is underlying this process. All psychological experience is a continuum of mental events. It is just like this. All psychological experience is a continuum of mental events. This is how it continues, according to Theravada Abhidhamma. Now, this cognition is not the immediate result of the contact between the sense organ and sense object. So when you have a contact or connection between sense organ and sense object, the kind of consciousness that you have, it should not be understood in that simple way. There is much more than that. It is not the immediate result. When you talk about a cognition, it is not the immediate result of this combination or this coming together of these 2 things. It is a cumulative result of a continuum of cognitive events. So this is represented as the process. For example, according to Theravada Abhidhamma, 17 moments of the process that constitute one cognitive moment. There is no self or subject behind the cognitive process as an enduring entity experiencing the object or an agent directing the various mental activities. Yeah, so we may have this confusion sometimes that normally, of course, because we have this notion of I and you, I and others, right? So I see, I understand, I experience, I feel, right? But what it says is that it is just the process. There is no subject, there is no agent behind the process that is actually experiencing mental events or directing the various mental activities. So it is all happening according to causes and effects, causes and conditions. The cognitive movements take place naturally according to the principle of psychological order, Chitta Niyama. Yeah, so this is what it is. Each stage in the continuum being conditioned by the immediate preceding one. So this is how the process continues. It is just happening according to Chitta Niyama. And each moment, each cognitive moment is functioning as cause for the next moment. Acharya Buddha says, there is no agent or director who, after the object has impinged on the sense organ, says, you perform the function of attention or you perform the function of cognition. Now keep in mind the number of cetasikas that are accompanied in a particular moment of chitta. So you have Phassa, Vedana, Sanya, Chetana, Ekagata, Jivitendriya, Manasikara, for example. And some other cetasikas from all these three groups. All these things form a unit like this. Okay. So when there is connection between sense object and sense faculty, and when it generates a particular type of consciousness in a specific cognitive moment, you have so many cetasikas present together with the chitta. Now without the cetasika, there is no chitta. Without the chitta, there is no cetasika. And there is no agent behind it in a single unit of this cognitive moment. You have all these things functioning together, supporting each other without having any underlying substance attached to any of this. And in a similar way, every cognitive moment. So the stream of consciousness is not separate from the cognitive moment or the cognitive events. It is these cognitive events that are to be regarded as the stream of consciousness in its active form and also in its passive form. The momentary mental events do not occur in the mind. You see, the momentary mental events, when you talk about so many mind moments in the stream of consciousness, they do not occur in the mind because they themselves are the mind. The momentary events themselves are the mind. So two aspects of it are recognized. One is the active aspect that is presented by cognitive moments. The other is bhavanga consciousness, that is the passive aspect of it. So bhavanga literally means constituent of becoming, bhava anga, right? And it is a resultant consciousness out of 89 chitta. So it is called a resultant consciousness if you categorize it, vipaka chitta. So it does not really produce any kind of, karma, but it functions as a continuation of the, chitta. It should be understood in terms of two streams of consciousness, Viti Chitta and Viti Mutta. Process consciousness, process free consciousness. So it is like, if it is not active, it is passive. If it is not passive, it is active. Three functions of Viti Mutta, Chitta, as Bhavanga, as Chuti Chitta, and as Patisandhi Chitta. As Bhavanga, it ensures the uninterrupted continuity of individual life through the duration of any single existence. Okay, so from birth until one's death, the stream of consciousness that continues. The continuation is maintained by Bhavanga. When process consciousness is interrupted, say with deep dreamless sleep, Bhavanga Chitta takes over, and hence the continuous flow of consciousness is maintained. So when it is active, right? But for example, when somebody is in deep dreamless sleep, like a dead person, one does not know anything. There is no dream also, right? What happened to that person then? What happened to the to his consciousness? It says that then it is in the passive mode. That is Bhavanga Chitta. That is continuing his, existence in this particular lifetime. It intervenes between every two cognitive process and thus separates them as two different cognitive units. Yeah, so otherwise you are not going to have two different units. So that is what is shown here. Two cognitive moments are linked with Bhavanga consciousness. So in between every two cognitive moment, you have Bhavanga consciousness being active, being present actually. You can say active. It is passive consciousness. Yeah. As the Chitta, that is clearly represented as the death consciousness, the last thought moment of a person when dying. And Patisandhi Chitta is the rebirth linking consciousness that first occur in a new life. Immediately after the rebirth linking consciousness has arisen and fallen away, it is followed by the Bhavanga consciousness, which performs the function of preserving the continuity of the individual existence. So after the first thought moment has arisen and fallen away, in a new life, there are several moments that is maintained by Bhavanga consciousness. What it means is that it is not active immediately after that. It is maintained by this Bhavanga consciousness. Okay, now let's talk about the objects of the process-free consciousness. The object of the process-free consciousness is the subsequent life. In the subsequent life is the last thought moment of the previous life. So this is what we have discussed earlier, that it may appear in three ways: in terms of a karma, good or evil karma, or a sign or image of a karma, determine the gati, and a sign of the destination, gati nimitta. So either as a karma, or as a karma nimitta, or as a gati nimitta. So this, any of this can be an object in the last thought moment, in the Chuti Chitta of a person in a life. Okay, so with that object, in that mind moment, one dies. This object in some way is present in all three phases of the process-free consciousness. So the object in the Chuti Chitta can become an object in the Bhavanga as well, and then end up in the Patisandhi. So that is why I think probably in the traditional Buddhist countries, when somebody is about to pass away, when people come to know about it, what they do is normally, if there is enough time, they invite monastic members from temples to come and recite sutras, right, chanting, so that there is a beautiful environment is created, or they play some chanting music, chanting, recorded chanting, right, or preaching of the Dhamma discussion, so that a kusala, wholesome environment is created, and then the person can have a good thought at the dying moment. As an object which is identical with what an individual has experienced in his last cognitive process in the immediately preceding existence. Yeah. So the object that is present in the dying moment can become the object in the next, in the first chitta of the next life. So what it means is that the causality is not interrupted. Okay, there is no uncaused consciousness. The causality is maintained. It is always there. The process-free consciousness should not be understood as an unrelated entity existing by itself. Yeah. So this is what we have been saying, that one should not understand these two processes, two parallel processes going on. One is active, one is passive. It is not completely an unrelated entity existing by itself. So it is like, it may be passive, it may be active. If it is not active, it is in the passive form. If it is not passive, that means it is active. It is the same stream of consciousness. It is neither an undercurrent persisting as the substratum of the process consciousness, nor is it the source of the process consciousness. The two streams of consciousness are not parallel movements functioning concurrently. It is only when process consciousness consisting of a cognitive process subsides, then the process-free consciousness supervenes. Yeah, so when one is not functioning, the other is then functioning. There is thus an alternative flow of the two streams of consciousness. Yeah. So you can talk about two streams of consciousness in the sense that when one is present, the other is absent in that respect. Otherwise, it is the same stream of consciousness. Yes, so we have discussed briefly about this, that there are 6 doors, and these 6 doors could be classified into 2 in terms of Panchadwara Viti and Manodwara Viti. The process, cognitive process connected to 5 sense doors, that is eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, and the cognitive process connected to mind door. The door, dwara in Pali, is the word used for the sense organs because it is through them as media that the mind interacts with the objects and it is through them that the objects enter the range of the mind. So it is because of this reason, dwara is, coupled with these sense faculties, and that is how you have chakku dwara, right? And then dwara, nasika dwara, jibha dwara, kaya dwara, mano dwara. The mind door is the channel from which even the 5-door process emerge. Therefore, they are sometimes called mixed door process, misaka dwara viti, as they involve both the mind door and the physical sense door. Accordingly, the ideational process that occurs solely at the mind door are also called bare mind door process. So these two types of process of consciousness can be termed differently, in the sense that the first 5 types have even manodwara, cognitive aspect functioning. Okay, so therefore it is considered as misaka dwara viti, mixed door process. So you get information or data through the sense organs, and then they are processed within the mind, and that is how you have a particular cognitive process completed. Okay, and therefore it is called a mixed door process. And the manodwara viti is also called suddha manodwara viti, purely or only mind door process, because it does not have any connection with other physical sense bases. Any questions so far?
So far, no, teacher.
Okay. Okay, so let's continue then. So we are also talking about these objects, like these different, types of objects in terms of their intensity, or their gravity or impact that they produce on the thought process. So the 4 types of objects, based on the intensity of the impact on the cognitive process, not on their size or grossness, are this: very great, ati mahanta, great, mahanta, slight, parikta, and very slight, ati parikta. So as I was saying, if it is very great, it is more likely to complete the 17 moments in a particular cognitive process, whereas if it is great, slight, and very slight, they do not really contribute to the completion of 17 moments in the process. So if the object is very great, it will give rise to the maximum number of cognitive events, and if great, slight, or very slight, this will reflect in the number of cognitive events that the object will generate. So these are the 17 moments, 17 cognitive events that we are talking about. So all these 17 steps have to be completed to form a full cognition. And it should be noted that these 17 mind moments are compared to one physical moment, one matter moment. And they should be understood in terms of change. Okay, so it means that as long as you talk about anicca or impermanence, changeability, the time that is considered for a particular matter to change in a particular moment is compared to the changing of mind moment 17 times. So the change of mentality is 17 times faster than the change in the matter, the change that takes place in matter. So that is how it is discussed. Now, this is also significant because when you talk about cognition, perception of a particular object, if both mind and matter changing at the same time, then it is not possible to have direct perception of anything, right? So there cannot be direct knowledge of any object. So this is the theory that is provided in the Theravada Abhidhamma to say that direct perception is possible because mind changes 17 times faster than matter. So by the time matter changes, one mind moment can complete all these 17 steps to have full cognition of that object because it has not changed until then. A cognitive process with a very great object will give rise to a full cognitive process whose temporal duration will consist of 17 mind moments. The cognitive process with a very great object is the one where the object which enters the avenue of sense door remains until it is fully grasped by that cognitive process. So therefore, one matter moment equal to 17 mind moment. Now these are the details of these 17 mind moments. See, the moment starts with past bhavanga. Okay, so you have this bhavanga chitta. First moment is represented by bhavanga. It is still passive, but immediately after that, it gets vibrated. Okay, let's look at the description. So that is called bhavanga chalana. Bhavanga starts to vibrate. Bhavanga vibrates as sense object enters to sense door, and then immediately after that, it is called bhavanga upacheda. Bhavanga gets interrupted. At this moment, it is no more a bhavanga because 5 door adverting consciousness become awake. Any of the door, it can be eye, it can be nose. Cognitive process starts from here and process consciousness begins. So it is no more process free now. Okay, so first 3 moments, even though they are termed as bhavanga, because there is a rapid change, so they are included in the process. But strictly speaking, especially the first one, it is still the bhavanga. Only in the next 2 moments it gets vibrated and interrupted. So therefore, they are initial stage in the process consciousness. But from here only, process consciousness actually begins. Then sense consciousness begins. A particular sense become really, really active. Mere awareness of the presence of object. It knows, if it is eye is, awake. If it is ear is active but then it is still not in the position to really identify the object yet. So therefore it is called mere awareness without identifying what it is. It is called dasana kicca, dasana matta. It is just the functioning of seeing, that's all. It does not still know what it sees. It does not produce knowledge of any sort. Judge the impingement of the object. Object is not identified as blue, etc. Yeah. And then immediately after this, there are 3 subsequent moments of receiving, investigating, and determining. It is these 3: receiving, investigating, and determining. 6, 7, and 8. Determining the object. The object comes to be gradually comprehended by the discriminative and selective functions of the mind. So, in other words, in these 3 sub-moments, receiving, investigating, and determining, the aspect of mind becomes active in identifying the object. It did not identify it yet. It will need several more moments to identify, but it is towards that direction. You know, if it is a sight, it is connected to Chakodwara, eye door, eye consciousness will become active, right? Not the conscious, not the other types of consciousness associated with other doors. And it will then become active towards the direction of identifying the object as a sight. Okay, so that will become very, very active in these 3 moments, and immediately after that, running swiftly, that is Javana, 7 moments. So in these 7 moments, it decides what it is. So it takes 7 moments to completely, you know, understand what is it. An act of apprehending the object in 3 successive phases. These 3 phases takes place in these 7 moments: cognitive, affective, volitional. Experiencing the object, the state of being attracted to or repulsed by the object, and as kusala and akusala. So the moral aspect of the cognition comes much later in these 7 moments. You know the object first, what it is, and then based on that, you generate a kind of feeling, you like it or you do not like it. And based on that, your thought as kusala or akusala arises, and then either side you take, you register that as that type of object, and then it becomes that particular type of mental movement, kusala chitta or akusala chitta. Tadarammana, that is the last moment, having that object. Registration, consciousness, full process of cognition. So that is Tadarammana here. This is Tadarammana registering. So it takes 2 moments actually. Yeah. And immediately after that, Bhavanga start again. So this is represented as one cognitive moment, consists of 17 cognitive events, a representation of full process for a cognitive moment. Before that and after that, there is a stream of Bhavanga, and then the next cognitive moment starts. Now what is shown here is cognitive process differs depending on its stimulus. We have been talking about 4 types of objects. If it is very strong, it comes up to Tadaram Manavara. If it is strong, it comes up to Javanavara. It probably does not resistate, does not come up to the registration process. If it is slight, up to Vottapanavara. So what happens in the Vottapanavara? Determine. So before Javana. And then if it is very slight, it is called Mogavara. It disappears in the vibration, Bhavanga vibration stage. It disappears here. Does not proceed. Yeah, this is shown clearly here. I think you can identify, you can look at this chart and then try to figure out and see if you have any question looking at this chart. Bhavanga, fast Bhavanga, vibrational Bhavanga, arrest Bhavanga, 5-door adverting, Panchadwara Vachana. Any of the sense faculty becoming active, sense consciousness becoming active. E is represented as I consciousness. And then receiving, investigating and determining. These three things takes place. Immediately after that, 7 moments of Javana, 2 moments of registration, and then Bhavanga consciousness. This is in the case of very great object. In the case of great object, up to Javana. Okay, so there could be 2 slightly different process. So one can have, depending on this past Bhavanga. So in this case, you have 2 moments of past Bhavanga. In the other one, you have 3 moments of past Bhavanga. If the object is slight, then you can have all these variants. So maximum number of cognitive events that a slight object can give rise to is determination. It is very slight, it can go up to vibration. Otherwise, it is just Bhavanga. Okay, so we have been discussing for about an hour now. Do you have any question or remark so far?
If I have to say something about this, I think this chapter is just a lot more confusing than the previous 2, which basically just lists Dashtantika and Chittas. So I think that this is a lot more confusing.
Yeah, that is true. But the purpose of this chapter is to make things clearer, not to
Yeah, but it's not exactly doing what it's supposed to do.
One reason could be because we are not really, familiar with these things. So we do not think of this or read about this so much. So that is why it appears to be a bit, confusing to us. But if you, go through these chapters or, look at this description a few times, then it will be more clear. Okay, so you just have to bring your focus into this aspect of momentariness of dharmas, and how this moments continues, how it is produced, what is the connection between the two moments. So,
I'll try to do that, teacher. Thank you.
yes, I would suggest that you look at Professor Kanadasa's text again by yourself. As I said, I prepared these slides based on his chapter basically, because he tried to present in a more systematic order. The only difficulty is that, of course, first of all, the subject matter is difficult. Secondly, it has to be approached very carefully, because otherwise one may have some misunderstanding, especially with regard to consciousness being the only permanent entity. That is also not a correct view, you see. Therefore, one has to be very, very careful, because in any case, this is a tendency of common worldling, that we easily fall into the trap of either existence or non-existence. That is what is said in so many suttas, including this Kachanagutta Sutta by the Buddha. He says that generally people either take the side of existence or take the side of non-existence, and these two are two extremes. And then the Buddha says that what he teaches is just causality. Could you a bit more illustrate Bhavanga Chitta within few sentences? Bhavanga Chitta is to be understood in terms of process-free consciousness when it is not active. So it is considered as a passive form of consciousness. One example given is when somebody is in deep, dreamless sleep. One is in the state of Bhavanga Chitta, because one's consciousness is not active. That is one way of understanding it, and probably easier way to understand it. Otherwise, even when we are functioning actively, when all our sense organs, sense consciousnesses are functioning, it should be understood that one's existence in a particular life is represented in terms of Vijnana Sota, stream of consciousness, and this Vijnana Sota is consisted of countless numbers of cognitive moments. In this stream of consciousness consisted of countless numbers of cognitive moments. In between every two cognitive moment, Bhavanga Chitta functions. That is how the continuity of the stream of consciousness is maintained, and each cognitive moment is consisted of 17 cognitive events that depends on different types of objects, right? And Bhavanga, discussion of Bhavanga Chitta is particularly important when you talk about two lifetimes, this life and the next life, because the question is how, if there is no underlying entity in the consciousness with regard to our existence, then when somebody dies, what is it that transmits to the next life? There is no transmission that takes place. The process continues, process of consciousness, but it is in a different phase, explained in terms of Chuti Chitta and Padisanti Chitta and Bhavanga Chitta. All three moments having similar type of object, if not the same object, but similar object, because of which continuity is maintained, and not exactly transmission, I think, but the karma and effect of one's actions or this life to next life is maintained. So Bhavanga Chitta refers to the passive aspect of the consciousness when it is not active. Now, of course, if you are trying to understand in the sense that, okay, now I'm joining this class, I'm all active, my mind is active, it should not be understood in that way, because your understanding of becoming active is not, a representation of what it means by active consciousness and passive consciousness. As I said, even when we are active, when our senses are functioning, so it says, in a blink of an eye, billions of mind moments pass, right? And then in between every two moments, cognitive moments, there is Bhavanga Chitta. So Bhavanga Chitta is always there. Okay, so I think the discussion is becoming quite condensed and probably a bit confusing for some of you. So we can have a break now for 10 to 15 minutes so that you can process in your stream of consciousness what we have been discussing about the cognitive process. Then we come back to the discussion again. Okay.
Okay, teacher.
Okay, thank you, teacher.
Okay. See you after the break. Okay, let us continue our discussion of Bhavanga Chitta and cognitive process. So far we have been discussing about this cognitive process in terms of especially Panchadwara Abhidhamma, cognitive process associated with different sense doors. So there is another type that is called Manodwara Vidhi. We will come to discuss about that later on. So we have been discussing that depending on different types of object, the cognitive process or the mental cognitive events that occur within a cognitive moment differs. Okay, so it is only in the case of very great object that you can have full cognitive moment. So with this understanding, let us now move to the discussion of momentariness and direct perception. If you remember, we have been talking about duration of mind moment as opposed to matter moment. That is, one moment of matter is compared with 17 moments of mind. Or in other words, probably 17 sub moments, cognitive events that constitute a complete cognitive moment. So when it is said that a complete cognitive process lasts for 17 mind moments, it does also mean that a complete cognitive process lasts for one matter moment. It means the lifespan of a moment of matter is longer than that of a moment of mind. So that is understood. The theory makes it possible for a given material thing to arise before the arising of consciousness, at least before the occurrence of one mind moment, and yet be the object of that very same consciousness. The fact that a material object lasts as long as 17 mind moments means that it allows itself to be fully cognized by a series of 17 cognitive events. So, this is how the Theravadins solve this problem of direct perception. Yeah, because if both mind and matter changes at the same time within the same duration of time, then it is difficult to establish the direct perception of the object. But since matter, changes a bit slower than the mind, then by the time a matter changes, the mind moment, the cognitive moment has enough time to cognize the object. Thus, the Theravadins were able to establish the theory of direct perception of the external object, despite their recognizing the theory of momentariness. So it says that it is true only of a single cognitive process based on any one of the physical sense organs. Yeah. So now it should be clear that the focus is only on one cognitive moment or one cognitive process based on any one of the physical sense organs. Okay, so this is still associated with Panchadwara Vidi. However, each single cognitive process is not only repeated several times, but is also followed by several sequel of mind door or ideational process, which exercise a synthesizing function on what is cognized. It is only then and then only that a distinct recognition of the object occurs. So what it says is that if you remember, this Panchadwara Viti is also called mixed, process of consciousness. It is called mixed process because it is not only associated with the physical sense organs, but it is also associated with consciousness. So there is a very important role played by mind as well. And to separate from this type of cognitive process, the Manodwara Viti, is called Suddha Manodwara Viti, purely bare mind door process, right? So what happens in this one cognitive moment is that it is a single cognitive process and it is being repeated several times, followed by the sequence of mind door process. Then there is recognition of object. There is, however, different viewpoints with regard to this in different Buddhist schools. So here I have noted 4 different viewpoints as recorded in the Abhidhamma Mahavibhasha Shastra, a text belonging to Sarvastivada school. So Vaibhashika system of thought says that it is the eye, the visual organ, that sees. But it can do so only when it is associated with visual consciousness. It is the visual consciousness that cognizes the object. However, it can do so only when it relies on the force of the eye. It means that while the eye sees the object, visual consciousness is aware of it. Here a distinction is made between seeing, pashyati, and cognizing, vijanati. So this is talking about the coming together of visual organ and visual consciousness. How these two are linked together. One cannot really do the action without the other. So the cognition takes place only in the mind, but one has to see the object through the eye, right? So that is how, according to Vaibhashika, eyes do the action of seeing and the mind does the action of cognizing. Dharmatrata, a Buddhist scholar monk, according to him, it is the visual consciousness that sees the object. So his emphasis is on visual consciousness alone. So probably he wants to say that you may have some data or information through the eyes, but as far as recognition or cognizing of the object is concerned, it is the visual consciousness that is active, and because of that, this cognition takes place. Koshaka, another master, he says that it is the understanding, prajna, conjoined with consciousness that really sees the object. So in the exposition of Goshaka, we find that he focuses on, or he emphasizes on a particular cetasika, that is prajna, understanding. So the process has to be accompanied by prajna. Okay. When the prajna is conjoined with consciousness, then only this seeing takes place. Acknowledging or understanding or cognizing of the object takes place. And the last one is Dashtantika. This was one of the Buddhist schools in India. So according to this school, it is the confluence, samagri of consciousness and its concomitants that takes as the that acts as the agent of seeing. So here you'd see that according to this school, it is talking about the coming together of Chitta and Cetasika that function as the agent of seeing. So what we can see here is that even though all these masters and schools talking about visual perception taking place, but they have different opinions with regard to the complete perception, who actually sees the object, who perceives the object. Is it the eye? Is it the visual consciousness? Is it prajna accompanied by consciousness? Or is it just a functioning of chitta and chatasika? Now, here it is the viewpoint of Theravadins. So you'd find this statement basically mentioned in suttas also, that says that the eye does not, the eye comes in contact with the object, and then there is Chakuviyana takes place. So here it says the eye does not see a visible object because it has no mind. Chakung rupang na pasati acitta kata. The mind does not see because it has no eyes. Cittang na pasati achakku kata. So this is very clear because a mind, it says, cannot see because it does not have eye, and eyes does not see because it does not have mind. So it seems to say that both should function together. If the eye sees, then during the time a person is having other non-visual consciousness too, he should be able to see visible things, which really is not the case. This is because the eye is devoid of volition. Yeah. So if you stress too much on the eye alone, then it says that if you are saying that eyes see the object, when you neglect the presence of eye consciousness and all the other aspects, then it would mean that he should be able to see visible things. When he is having other non-visual consciousness. Even when he is having non-visual consciousness, he would see things. It is like saying, how do you say? Yeah. So when you pay attention to a certain object, when you open your eyes, when your eye indriya is functioning, you see things. But you notice only the things that you pay attention to. Whatever comes into the avenue of your eyes, you do not see it all. But if you are saying that I actually sees the object, then it should mean that whatever that comes into the sphere of eyes, one should see them. Or even when you are looking at a certain things, but actually you are probably having a different thoughts. I think it happens that you are looking at a certain aspect or a certain view somewhere, but you are just looking at it. You are not actually seeing it because your mind is somewhere else. Sometimes it so happens that you are so much lost in the thoughts that even though your eyes are open, if somebody comes in front of you, you do not notice it. Right? But if you say that it is the eye that sees, then it should mean that when the attention or volitions are not present also, I should see. So that means whatever comes in the sphere of eyes, one should see them. Even when you are thinking about something, If it is in front of your eyes are open, you should see them. But that does not happen. On the other hand, were consciousness itself to see a visible object, it would be able to see things lying behind the wall as well, as it cannot be obstructed by resistant matter. Apatika bhavato. Yeah. The other hand says that if you put too much stress on the consciousness, saying that it is the consciousness that sees the visible object, then it should mean that if something is, on the other side of a wall somewhere else, my consciousness should see, because consciousness is not to be obstructed by any kind of matter. It should not need eyes to see. So how does seeing of an object exactly takes place? It is also important because when you talk about mind movement, cognitive movement, because you are talking about, change of mind or functioning of mind in terms of cognitive moment, and every moment is different from one another. And this is happening in the stream of consciousness in a repeat succession. And then when you talk about object being perceived by consciousness and the change of object, momentary change of object, you need to think of the object in terms of atoms, or in terms of cluster of atoms, different groups of atoms. It's called Rupa Kalapa, material cluster. So you'd come to know about it when we go to the discussion of matter later on, if we have enough time. When it is maintained by some that it is the eye that sees, they do not mean every instance of the eye, but the eye that is supported by consciousness, you see. So this makes it clear. When you say that eye sees an object, it should mean that when the eye is accompanied by consciousness, volition, or other chatasikas, attention, manasikara, and so on, then only there is actually the seeing that takes place. Not every instance of the eye. So even though your eyes are open, you do not always see. Likewise, when it is maintained that consciousness sees, they do not mean every instance of consciousness, but consciousness supported by the eye. Further, it should be understood that when it says depending on the eye and visual objects arises eye consciousness, the question as to what is that sees and what is that is seen does not actually arise. Why is that? Because there is no agent or action here. So the question of who sees and what is seen do not arise. So that is what it means. It says that because there is no agent or action, it is just a process. What we really see here is the play of impersonal dharmas. So it is like a certain dharmas arising and ceasing, or certain dharmas functioning as cause, giving rise to the arising of certain other dharmas. That is how the Abhidharmikas look at it. The dharmas appearing as causes and effects. It is merely as a matter of conforming to worldly expressions that it is said the eye sees, the consciousness cognizes. To conform the worldly expression, that is, to make sense of this meditative experience or the reality of existence as it is functioning to the conventional world, that people have to use these expressions that the eye sees, the consciousness cognizes. Now we are going to have a discussion on the object of perception. Now let's focus on the object. What exactly is it that constitutes the object of perception? The problem arose in the context of the theory of atoms, material clusters, rupa kalapa, all physical objects of perception are atomic in composition. The question is how an atomically analyzable physical object becomes the object of sensory consciousness. So now here the question is, any object is, external object, rupa, in this case is comprised of countless numbers of atoms. So when you talk about cognition of an object, what happens? What kind of cognition one has of the object? Because it is consisted of atoms. So which part of the atom that one really cognizes or sees? How does one form one's understanding of the object? So there are two viewpoints. It may be that one single atom, that is one material cluster, impinges on the organ of sight. Here the actual reference is to the color associated in a single material cluster. All Buddhist schools agree that a single atom cannot generate sensory consciousness for the obvious reason that a single atom is not visible. So there may be the viewpoint that it is just one single atom or one aspect of the atom that creates the cognition, but there is also a different viewpoint that says that one atom really cannot generate consciousness and it is not visible. The second alternative is to suppose that several atoms impinge on the organ of sight. Here the actual reference is to the color associated with several material clusters. This possibility too is rejected. Even this possibility is rejected when it says that it is not just one, but several atoms together impinge on the organ of sight. What it seems to mean is that the object of sensory consciousness is not a mere collection of atoms, but a conglomeration of atoms assembled together in a certain manner. So it's like saying, when you talk about a person in terms of 5 aggregates, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, or Mahabhuta, elements and so on, or even different parts of the body, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, head, legs, and feet, hands, all these parts. If you're just saying that all this part put together is a human being, that is not the case. All different parts of the body should be in the right place. They should be assembled together or put together in the right place in a certain manner. Only then you call that a person. Not just because 5 aggregates are together and then you call it a person or a being. Okay, so what it says here is that it is not just a mere, putting together of atoms or coming together of different atoms, but a conglomeration of atoms assembled together in a certain manner. So they should appear in a certain manner. They should function in a certain manner. It is like many strands of hair becoming visible as each strand contributes to the total visibility of the hair. This is just an example to support the previous statement that, of course, there are a number of atoms coming together, but each of them should function distinctly, and also together also they should appear in a certain manner. So far we have discussed about the 5-door cognitive process. Let's now look at a mind-door cognitive process that occurs when ideas or image come into the range of the mind. Okay, so this much is with regard to the 5-door cognitive process in terms of sense organs and also sense objects. Now let's look at the mind-door cognitive process. It is also called bare mind-door process, as we have been discussing, Sutta Manodwara Viti, as opposed to mixed Dwara Viti, because it operates independently of the physical sense organs. Yeah, so here the discussion just focus on what happens within the mind only, mind alone, without any reference to sense organ, physical sense organ. There are 4 conditions necessary for an ideational process, namely, the mind must be intact, asambhinnatta manasa, mental objects must come within the mind's focus, apatagatatta dhamman, dependence on the heart base, batu sannisita, and attention, manasikara. So these 4 aspects should be present in a mental cognitive process, a manodwara biti. Mind has to function properly, and in the thought process, you should have objects for the thought process, and then dependence on the heart base. I think probably this is referring to the aspect of feeling, and then necessary attention. And as we have mentioned earlier, the objects for this mind door process is categorized into 2 as vibhuta and avibhuta, clear and not clear. However, there is this important difference to be noted. While the objects of the 5 door processes belong strictly to the present moment, the objects of the mind door process could belong to any period of time, past, present, or future. They could even be free from any temporal reference, kala vimutta, as in the case of conceptual constructs and nibbana, the unconditioned. Yeah, so this is something that we need to keep in mind, that when you talk about cognitive process associated with Panchadwara 5 door, 5 sense door, then the discussion focuses on only present moment. But when you talk about mind door process, manodwara biti, it is not restricted to present moment, and there is sufficient reason for that, because you may think of something in the past, something in the future, or when you are completely free from the samsaric bondage, when you become a liberated saint, at that time the way your mind functions cannot be restricted in any time period. Sequence of events in a mind door process with a clear object. Now this is with regard to a clear object, and this is said to be the object that can produce a full cognitive moment. But in this case, you are not going to have 17 moments. Okay, so what you have is vibration of the vabhanga. When an object enters the avenue of the mind door, the arrest of the vabhanga, mind door adverting consciousness, 7 moments of javana, 2 moments of registration, after which the cognition process subsides into the bhavanga. So if you count here, you see that 1, 2, 3, plus 7, 10, 12. 12 cognitive events. In the case of a mind door process occasioned by an obscure object, the 2 moments of registration do not occur. So you may have just 10. The registration aspect is not present. Thus, in a mind door process, the stage of receiving, investigating, and determining do not occur. So these 3 things are not present. Santirana, Sampadicchana, and Gottapana, right? So these are present only with regard to the cognitive process associated with sense organ, because they are mental activities which operate only in relation to an object which is external. Yeah. So this is how it is. Now you can look at this and you have a clear idea. This is in the case of clear object, right? So you have bhavanga, and this is what happens in between the bhavanga chitta. 12 cognitive events, starting with vibration and then arrest, and then manodhara. Okay, VT starts. You do not have this 5-door adverting or eye consciousness. Instead of this two, you have a mind door process, followed by javana, 7 moments of javana. These 3 are not also present, receiving, investigating, determining, because these are associated with external objects. So after 7 moments of javana, you have 2 moments of tadaramana, registration, and then bhavanga starts again. And this is in the case of unclear object, obscure object. You have vibrational bhavanga, arrest bhavanga, and then mind door adverting, manodhara vajjana, and then 7 moments of javana. After that, you do not have 2 moments of registration, just have bhavanga. Okay, now let's discuss about how an object enters the range of the mind door. So there are 2 possible occasions that are discussed. One is that when mind door processes arise in response and consequence to a cognitive process based on any of the physical sense organs that we have discussed, in the case of cognitive process associated with panchadwara avajjana, because after the senses becoming aware of the object and so on, when it comes to the state of javana and so on, there is the functioning of mind. So therefore it says that when you talk about mind door process, manodhara viti, can be understood in 2 different ways. One is associated with this external objects, the other is just on the thought process, on the ideas or thoughts. So this is the first one, when mind door process arises in response and consequence to a cognitive process based on any of the physical sense organs. Their genesis is due to the circumstance that when a 5-door process has just ceased, its first object comes to the mind's focus and sets off many sequences of mind door process. It is these mind door processes that contribute to the distinct recognition of a sense object. Yeah. So here what you can see is that it is also talking about, I think, the subsequent cognitive process that takes place immediately after a cognitive moment associated with any of the physical sense organ. Okay, so you have one moment of one cognitive moment of, let's say, eye sense organ, right? And then it may be that immediately after that you have several moments of manodhara viti, resulting or in some way connecting to this previous moment, cognitive moment associated with eye sense organ. Okay, so this mind door viti, manodhara viti, results in so as it says, distinct recognition of the sense object. Distinct recognition of the sense object. So it also gives us an occasion to think that within just one moment of cognition, you may not have a complete understanding of the object. So it is always many moments of cognition. The other is when mind door processes take place is when an object enters the range of the mind door entirely on its own or naturally. So it is not associated with any of the sense organs, but the process starts within the mind alone, without being occasioned by an immediately preceding 5-door process. Yeah. So these are ideational processes which take place without an antecedent of sensory impingement. So you do not need any sensory impingement for that. It is just within your thought process that occurs automatically. It could be like if you are thinking of something, that happened long time back, or a certain thought comes into your mind, or you are planning something, that has not happened yet. The commentaries identify 3 occasions for the revival of such ideational process. The first is when one revives in memory what one has actually experienced with the 5 senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. So this is when it is associated with sense organ process. The processes of reflection occasioned by such revival are called experience-based process. So there is a particular term used for this. It is called experience-based process, the Tavara. The second type occurs when one revives in memory what one has reflected upon from information or knowledge gathered from a sensory source different from first-hand experience. And the process of reflection occasioned by such revival are called Sutavara or information-based process. So for example, you heard a certain teaching or something, right? And then later on you have been thinking about it. So you have the information or knowledge within your mind and you are reflecting on that. So the process that starts with that knowledge, based on that knowledge, it is called Sutavara, information-based process. The third occasion when ideational process could occur is when one imaginatively constructs an object on the basis of what one has actually experienced and also on what one has learned from information gathered from a sensory source. The process of reflection occasioned by such imaginative construction are called processes based on both. Yeah, so what you experienced physically, what you have been thinking about based on the information can, based on these 2 things, if you do further imagination, further reflection, that is called processes based on both, Ubhaya Vara. Yeah, so yes, so when talking about Manodwara Viti, this is next section because so far we have been talking about the Panchadwara Viti in general and Manodwara Viti in general. In the case of probably beings of Kamavachara world basically. So here you would find Manodwara Viti specifically in regard to beings in jhana and also beings of Lokuttara category of beings. Just look at the 2 processes here. This is the process in the case of beings in jhana. So it seems like there are 2 alternatives. First one is said to be for average jhanic process, jhanic mind probably. The other is keen, probably advanced person in jhana. So you have bhavanga in both sides. In between, the process is there. Vibrational bhavanga, and then arrest bhavanga, and then Manodwara Viti starts. After that, you have preparation, access, conformity, change of lineage, jhana. Jhana, as we have been discussing, jhana is a so it can be understood in terms of a full-fledged, complete, focus of mind. Okay, absorption in English, complete focus and complete, so in this stage, the mind is just focused on probably on the meditation object, and then it is not distracted anymore. It is complete one-pointedness of mind, and it is extremely focused, fully focused. There is no slight distraction of anything. So that is the development of mind at that stage. But now look at these few steps here. Preparation and access, these are representative of also development of mind to certain stage. So they are representative of focused mind also. Chittasa ekagata, development of mind to a certain stage, but not like jhanic mind. And here you have conformity, probably to show that, show its continuity. But what I want you to look at is this change of lineage. This is a very important aspect, change of lineage, because then one changes from this aspect of one's cognition process or mental state to jhanic state in this regard here. But in the case of Magga and Phala, from Putujjana to noble being, so it is a big shift, especially in the case of Lokuttara being. It is not a very big shift here yet, right? Yes, but it is a very big shift in the sense that you become a noble person after that. Okay, change of lineage means change of gotra. Gotra, you change your status from common worldly being to noble person. Yeah. So here you have vibration Bhavanga, Eras Bhavanga, and then Manodwara Viti, then preparation, access, then conformity, change of lineage, then path and fruition. So you do not have jhana here, you see. So it is not necessary to develop jhana if you are striving towards attainment of Sotapatti, Sakadagami, Anagami, or even Arahanthood. But I guess there could be a different process, a mixture of these two, when somebody from this Lokatra category, a Lokatra being, develops jhana, because then the jhanic mind should be present there as well, I guess. So this is just some further explanation, not very important, kind of a repetition also, but just look at this slide here. We have been talking about the rebecoming or relinking consciousness, Juti Chitta and Padisandhi Chitta. So it is clearly shown in this chart here. Just look at this chart carefully. Now we have been talking about cognitive process and then what happens at the moment of death. So RB is represented by rebirth consciousness. B is bhavanga. So this is when the life continues. So after death, when one is born with the rebirth consciousness, immediately after that, bhavanga continues. Okay. And after that, past bhavanga. Now this is representative of one moment, first moment probably after bhavanga and rebirth consciousness. Okay. So you have vibrational bhavanga, arrest bhavanga, and then 5-door adverting, I consciousness, receiving, and then investigation, determining, jhana. And then after that, death consciousness. So this is Chuti Chitta, and then new life begins. So it should come here again. In a similar way, you have bhavanga consciousness, continues, right? And then manodara viti, javana, and then you have bhavanga again, death consciousness. Then rebirth consciousness takes place. Death, rebirth. So two things are, I think, mentioned here. One is in the case of probably lives that are having faculties like eye, ear, nose, tongue. In the case of lives that are not having sense faculties, but at certain stage the consciousness is functioning, right? Mind is functioning. And then javana. So it seems that it is when, if you talk about active and passive consciousness, it is not so much active yet, right? Because it is not constituting the full cognition. Yeah. So with this, we are going to end our class here today. If you have any question or any suggestion, you can raise. And if you think it is a difficult topic to really understand, then I will send you this video recording. Can listen to the recording again, and I suggest that you go through a chapter from Professor Karnadas and also try to look at a certain section of Buddhist text, Abhidhamma. Okay. Okay, I have sent the video recording to everyone. So there are a few more important topics of discussion that are remaining. One is with regard to the analysis of matter. The other is conditional relations, right? And also, if it is possible, probably we can spend some time discussing the Abhidhamma concept of time and space. So there are these three topics let's see which one we can cover. For the discussion of Rupa, probably I'm not going to spend so much time. Just try to provide you some general explanation with regard to this topic, and then immediately after that, or probably before even discussing about Rupas, we need to focus on conditional relations, I guess. Let's see how it goes. But yes, if you are just waiting for the lecture, 3 hours of lecture, then it is not going to be very much helpful for you. You need to spend some time, probably, if it is not possible for you to spend time every day, at least 2-3 days in a week, you spend 1 or 2 hours going through this text, trying to figure out what is discussed within the text and make your own notes. I think that would be very good, because you cannot expect that within these 10-15 lectures in a semester that you are going to have a clear understanding of the topic. Okay. So the purpose is to have a general understanding of Theravada Abhidhamma, so that if you want to deepen your knowledge of Theravada Abhidhamma again later on, you can at least have some reference point to begin.